love to get started. So if we can have everyone's kind attention, that would be great. Okay. I want to begin with a number of thank yous. I'd like to thank, first and foremost, our Yeshiva students and their parents who helped to put all of this together. The Yeshiva students all studied one of the stories that we're going to learn together tonight, and we'll be giving voice to those stories and have created artistic expressions to reflect their feelings about those stories. And I want to welcome and thank each of you who is here as we move farther and farther away in time from the events of the Shoah. It takes more and more of a conscious and deliberate effort to make a point of being part of the Yom HaShoah observance and to be shaped religiously and morally by what it is that, what impact the story has upon us. And the last word of introduction I'd like to share is that there are numerous ways in which Yom HaShoah and the events of the Shoah intersect with where we are, the lives we are living right now. They intersect with an alarming rise in anti-Semitic activity in this country and elsewhere, intersect with the continued phenomenon of racism and marginalization of people in our country, in our society, and it in particular intersects with events that are unfolding and have been unfolding for weeks now in the Ukraine. There are eerie similarities in terms of how dehumanized military tactics can be. You really have to not see the human face and not hear the human cry. And a little bit later in the program, we'll be hearing from someone whose family has just recently fled from Ukraine to try to escape, much the way that Jews fled, trying to flee to safety, often unsuccessfully, as the Nazi war machine during World War II just expanded and expanded the areas of the continent that it was in control of. And so with those things in mind, we'll begin tonight. The first thing we always do is to light the Yortzeit candle that's in front of you. So adults, please, candles and matches. And once the Yortzeit candles are lit, okay, then I'll ask everyone to find the tonight's text that's in front of you. It's at every seat. And I'll ask everyone to stand as we recite the El Malei Rachamim. Together, everyone. El Malei Rachamim, Shochei Ramronim,
חמצי מנוחה נכונה, כנפי השכינה, מעלות קדושים וטהורים, בזוהר הרקיע מסבירים. את פה הנשמות של ששת מיליוני היהודים, חללי השואה מאירופה, שנהרגו, שנשחטו, שנשרפו ושנספו על קידוש השם, בידי המרצחים הגרמנים, ועוזריהם של העמים. בגטאות, בוורשה, בלודז' בווילנה, בלבוב בקובנה, בקרקאו ובשאר הגטאות, מחנות הריכוז וההשמדה, בטרבלינקה, באושוויץ בירקנאו, בברגן בלזן, בדכאו, בסוביבור, במדענט, במאוטהאוזן, בבלז'ן, בבוכנבורג, ובשאר מחנות השמדה, ופרטיזנים של הים. בעבור שקהל הקהל מתפלל לעילוי נשמותיהם. לכן ברחמים יסתירי בסתר כנפיו בעולמים, יצבור בצרור חיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם בגן עדן מנוחתם. יעמדו בגורלם לקץ הימים נאמר. Let's all have seats. And wherever it indicates a participant, I'll ask someone to be the participant who reads that part. And if you want to pass, you can most definitely pass. And can I start with? No, 1 second. Yeah. Thank you. And together. Burning, brothers, it's burning. Our poor shtetl pitifully burning. Angry wind with rage and curses tears and shatters and disperses while frenzy twists and turns. Everything now burns. And you stand there looking on, hands folded, palms upturned. And you stand there looking down as our shtetl burns. Our poor shtetl pitifully burning. Tongues of flames with force and power have our villages devoured, and the while with and churns, our shtetl burns. And you stand there looking on, hands folded, palms upturned. And you stand there looking down as our shtetl burns. God forbid the moment is up when our city, which now holds us, will as ash and flames enfold us, signs of slaughter, leaving all with black and empty walls. And you stand there looking on, hands folded, arms up. stand there looking on as our Shtetl burns. I've always found the excerpt from Tehillim Samach Tet 69 to be so powerfully apropos, even though the words were written millennia ago. So let's read them in English on the left side. Deliver me, O God, for the waters have reached my neck. I am sinking into the slimy deep and find no foothold. I have come into the watery depths, that flood sweeps me away. I am weary with calling, my throat is dry, my eyes fail while I wait for God. More numerous than the hairs of my head are those who hate me without reason. Many are those who would destroy me, my treacherous enemies. Must I restore? And this brings us to our first story for tonight. I came across this story, the story of this person, only through an obituary that ran in the New York Times, a very significant obituary, most of it paid, that appeared a number of months ago. And as I read the story of this person, I could not believe that I had never heard her name before. It just felt like someone whom we should know, and making up for a lot of lost time. I'm thankful to Ayala and to Samuel, who will tell the story tonight. And I'm just going to signal Nick with her spot.
Miriam Morgenstein was born on August 8, 1933 in Antwerp, Belgium, to an Orthodox Jewish family. Her father, Samuel, was a diamond dealer, and her mother, Sarah, was a homemaker.
In 1940, when she was about 7, the Germans invaded Belgium, and Miriam, together with her mother and father and 2 brothers, fled on foot westward to Calais, France.
Their flight was very dangerous, as they were soon running through open fields that were being bombarded by the Germans. By the time they reached Calais, family members had become separated, with Miriam, her mother, and her younger brother having become separated from her father and older brother. Her older brother wound up boarding a ship to England that was transporting women and children out of the war zone.
The family stayed in motion seeking safety. Miriam's mother and family used bribes and false papers as they fled from place to place, were seized while trying to cross into Spain, and were interred in a prison camp in German-occupied France.
And we'll learn more about Miriam Sarachek in just a little bit. And back to where we were before, together everyone. Vayareu otanu haGermanim, the Nazis caused us to suffer by tearing us from our homes, forcing us into ghettos, and driving us into hiding. Now I call upon Eliana and Mike, who is standing in for Aliza Teresh, who is out of town, who are going to be sharing a story that has become very much part of the community, the story of Hanka Adler, mother of Jason Adler. And the story has come to us through the beautiful book called The Red Hat that she had written, and now a full feature-length film called They Survived Together.
Before the war began, there was a girl named Hanka who lived in a tight-knit neighborhood in Krakow, filled with family and a strong Jewish community. Her parents ran a vegetable store, selling produce sold to them by Polish farmers.
When the Germans began bombing Krakow, Hanka's aunt brought all 50 of the children in the extended family into her basement. Of these, only Hanka and her siblings would ultimately survive the war.
After that, the Nazis came and took everything the family had, and then moved all of the Jews into a ghetto. The Nazis pointed their guns at the Jews as they were pushed into the ghetto.
When it was her family's turn to enter the ghetto, Hanka's nanny didn't come with them because she wasn't Jewish. Hanka started to cry, so her mother bought her a red hat. Throughout the war, Hanka never took it off.
When her family heard rumors that the Jews in the ghetto were all going to be moved to a concentration camp where they would be killed, Hanka's father arranged for one of the Polish farmers whom they knew to smuggle them out in the bottom of his vegetable cart.
Using false papers, the family made their way to the Czech border, where a guide led them across snowy mountains for many weeks, leading them to the border with Hungary.
After arriving in Hungary, the family spent some time in a village in Budapest, where Hanka's father became friends with a local priest. After the Nazis invaded Budapest, the priest told the SS guards that the family was Catholic and attended services at the church.
Soon, though, the family was forced into a series of labor camps where food was scarce and they practically starved. Hanka's mother stole potatoes. She was beaten and was lucky to not have been killed.
The 7 images capture 7 scenes from the story.
The hat is bought and Hanka never takes it off.
Hanka and her family enter the ghetto.
Hanka is almost killed by the dogs of the SS guards.
The family escapes the ghetto from inside a vegetable cart.
Hanka and her family get caught stealing away and are thrown in jail.
The family is released from jail and settles in a village in Hungary, and from there to labor camps.
Thank you so much. So, returning to tonight's Haggadah, we now take a moment to try to capture in our imaginations what it was like to remain in hiding, whether for a short moment in the bottom of a vegetable cart like Hanka and her family, or like Anne Frank and her family for months and months on end. And of course, hiding is not only physical hiding, but it's also hiding your identity, always with the fear of being exposed, and all of a sudden, your life being in jeopardy. So, to try to imagine that, we take a moment to sit absolutely still, as someone would if they were hiding desperately to save their lives. Our third story tonight, and I thank Yishai and Adam for preparing this story. I came across this one in the Jewish Review of Books. Perhaps you've received that publication as well. The article was about a memoir written by someone who had been in the Vilna ghetto. And I looked at the pictures, and the pictures looked like someone who we know, someone who could just be one of our 30-somethings or 20-somethings here at Shul. And I wanted to find out who this person was as well. And tonight, with thanks to Adam and Yishai, we'll find out a great deal about him.
In 1941, the Nazis invaded the city of Vilna, also known as Vilnius.
Hang on one second, guys. We can back you up just a
Vilna was a city so filled with Jewish people.
Nothing's coming up over there on the projector. Start from the beginning. Okay, start from the beginning.
In 1941, the Nazis invaded the city of Vilna, also known as Vilnius.
Vilna was a city so filled with Jewish people and Jewish culture that it was known as the Jerusalem of Lithuania.
The Nazis quickly established the Vilna Ghetto, in which they imprisoned the city's 60,000 Jews.
Among those 60,000 was a man by the name of Abraham Sutzkever. Abraham was a poet and lover of Yiddish culture. He was a young man with an unusual sense of humor and a unique outlook on things.
He continued to write poetry while in the ghetto, which helped to keep him somewhat positive. He had to be creative in terms of finding quiet places to write, including behind his bunk, in the sewer, and even in a coffin.
He was also a person of resistance. He worked on smuggling arms into the ghetto, and when he was assigned by the Nazis to round up Jewish books, he and others hid precious books and artworks, including a diary by Theodore Herzl and drawings by Marc Chagall, in the cavities and crannies of buildings.
Abraham's infant son and his mother were murdered in the ghetto. On the day after his mother's death, he was approached by a friend who asked for his help in creating a Yiddish theater in the ghetto. At first, Abraham thought that the idea was crazy, but after thinking about it for another couple of days, he realized that it could give hope to the Jews, and he decided to help create it. They worked hard day and night, and finally, it came to pass.
Abraham had a hard time coming up with ideas for plays that would entertain the Jews and give them hope, but would not insult them by ignoring their current position. Abraham found his ideas and made them happen. He gave the Jews hope when all seemed lost, and he helped them think back to better days when life was happy and they didn't have to worry about Nazis, and to hope that better days were still ahead.
And we have here a poem, an excerpt from a poem that Abraham Sutzkever wrote in 1942. And I'll ask Gabe and Hadar if you could go up, if you don't mind. That way the people who are on the other side of the Zoom screen can also hear you. Thank you. Sure. Either way.
The wheels they drag and drag on. What do they bring, and whose? They bring along a wagon filled with throbbing shoes. I must not ask you whose. My heart, it skips a beat. Tell me the truth, O shoes. Where disappeared the feet? The feet of pumps so shoddy, with button drops like dew. Where's the little body? Where is the woman too? All children's shoes, but where are all the children's feet? Why does the bride not wear her shoes so bright and neat? Amid clogs and children's sandals, my mom's shoes I see. On Shabbat, like the candles, she'd put them on in glee.
Mama, I run after them, Mama. Let me be a hostage to your love. Let me fall on my knees and kiss the dust of your holy throbbing shoe. But then all shoes, woven in my tears, look the same as Mama's. My stretched out arm dropped back as when you want to catch a dream. I'm alone, alone with my 30 years. In their pit they rot, those who once were called Papa, Mama, Child.
Remarkably, in the ghetto, there were actually lullabies written specifically for the frightening circumstances that children faced and the uncertainty they faced each day and each night in the ghetto. And this particular lullaby, as you remember from previous years, came to us from the Kovna and Vilna ghettos. The first paragraph is a transliteration of the Yiddish, and then after that is the translation. Schlaf meine Kind, schlaf wieder ruhig ein, bis die Nacht die Levona scheint, auf dem Himmel glanzen Sterne, guck mit Kind auf meiner Treppe, schlaf mein Kind, schlaf wieder ruhig ein. Sleep, my child, sleep this time, till the night allows the moon to shine. In the sky the stars appear, child, don't look upon my tears. Sleep, my child, sleep quietly this time. You'll hold our flag one fine day. With conviction you will lead the way. Say that people must be free. Rouse mankind and let them see that there is a better, freer world. And there's one additional stanza that I've never actually included. That additional stanza would just be, I can't even imagine singing it together. The mother tells the child that she acknowledges that your father is gone, we don't know where he is, we may never see him again. And just trying to imagine putting a child to sleep, having no choice but to acknowledge that reality. So now, although ideally we would find pieces of potato and cabbage that are weeks old and barely edible, that's not what we have. But we'll take either a piece of the potato or a piece of the cabbage and think about eating whatever it was that was brought into the ghetto on these wagons in small amounts, no matter how old it was, because this is what there was. We have comments from the ghetto, people just dreaming about potatoes, because potatoes has become their whole substance. Let's just take something. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri ha'adamah. We move, as so many Jews did, we move from the ghettos to what was often the next stop, and those were concentration camps, labor camps, death camps. And as we move, let's begin together. Ve'et lachatzenu zo hadachak. In our oppression, this refers to the crushing of our lives in labor and concentration camps. And the first thing that happened when those train doors swung open after many days of travel in the dark in cattle cars, overcrowded, with no idea where you're going. The first thing that happened after you came off the train and selections were made was that you surrendered all of the personal possessions you might still have had even at this point. And the surrender of personal possessions was, without question, intended to strip away the last shred of dignity and personal identity that anyone had, which was then emphasized by everyone being branded with a number, not even having their name. And so to think about that moment, try to imagine what that was, just symbolically take something, a watch, a piece of jewelry, whatever it may be, and place it on the table. And just an overview on the top of the next page. And maybe we'll start either with Sam or with Gail, whichever one would like. Just one small paragraph at a time, passing the baton to the person next to you. Just an overview of what we're talking about when we talk about concentration camps, labor camps, and death camps. And now we move to the story and the poetry, the heart-rending poetry of Yitzhak Katznelson. And we can move back to this side of the table, either Lisa or David or Marcia. And together an excerpt from his poem, The Song of the Murdered Jewish People. The end. At night the sky is aflame. By day the smoke coils, and at night it blazes out again. Oh, like our beginning in the desert, a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night. Then my people marched with joy and faith to new life. And now, in the end, all finished. All of us have been killed, young and old. We have all been exterminated. Rising over Lithuanian or Polish towns, the sun will never find a radiant old Jew at the window reciting psalms or going to the synagogue. Never will a Jew grace the markets and give them life. Never will a kapata flutter in markets on sacks of potatoes, flour, porridge. Never will a Jewish live the hen, pet a calf. There are no more Jews in the land. And Jewish children will never wake in the morning from bright dreams, never go to cheder, never watch birds, never tease, never play in the sand. Oh, little Jewish boys, oh, beautiful little girls, with your bright, pure faces smudged and disheveled, they are no more. And in a remarkable prayer that was written in the camps, prayer that was written for Pesach, when there was no choice, of course, but to eat bread, that's all there was. And even as people understood that the saving of one's life overrides the prohibition of eating chametz on Pesach, the sense that this was a moment at which God's permission needed to be asked, that sense was very powerful. It's hard to imagine, and yet so it was. And this is what brings us this remarkable prayer recited on Pesach in 1944. And Neely or Mindy? Together. Our Father in heaven, you surely know that it is our desire to do your will and to observe Pesach by eating matzah, by observing the prohibition concerning chametz. But to our great distress, our situation prevents us from doing so, and our lives are hanging in the balance. As such, we are hereby prepared and ready to fulfill the mitzvah of living by Torah and not dying by it. And so our prayer before you is that you allow us to live on, and that you redeem us, so that we soon fulfill your laws and serve you with a full heart. Amen. We take a piece of bread. Try to put ourselves in these shoes. Try to understand. Baruch atah It's now my great honor to introduce Dr. Oksana Yakushko, who had every intention of being here with us in the room tonight. And I'll explain the relevance of why she is not. First, just by way of introduction, and I thank Marcia Nimmer for connecting us to Oksana. She's the chair of the psychology department at the Pacifica Graduate Institute, and her resume reveals a stunning number of vitally important human issues that she researches and has published on. There's one line in particular from the bio on the Pacifica website that caught my eye. Her goal as chair is to nurture both the students and the clinical programs toward a soulful engagement with issues of today's world, inside and outside the classroom. Oksana is presently in Portugal, and I'm looking at the clock behind her. It appears to be 4:15 a.m. in Portugal. The reason that she is in Portugal, as she will explain, is that she went there to meet her family, who fled, just now fled Ukraine, and are trying to make a life for themselves in a country that they've never been to before, where they don't know the language. And this is a story that we know. This is a story of our people as well, fleeing to wherever you can flee, wherever there might be safety, and having to start again from scratch. And when we spoke, we talked about the experience of one day you're living your life, and the next day it's all taken away from you. And I know you were talking, of course, about the situation in Ukraine, the situation of your family, but it resonated, of course, very much with us as well. And thank you for getting up at this hour and sharing feelings and thoughts with us.
Thank you all for inviting me. I can hear an echo of my voice present. I hope it comes through all right from Lisbon.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Great. And I want to begin first with gratitude to everyone in your community who, with everything in you, in different ways, have tried to support Ukrainians in Ukraine in this time. So thank you. I also just, in the spirit of the what I think we're hearing is, we'll just tell you a story of my family and who are Ukrainians and who have very recently left suburbs of Kiev, Ukraine, and in fact, areas of Kiev, Ukraine that have been in the news that have shown really terrifying images of war and inhumanity. And it's just in all ways that I feel really blessed and lucky that they have escaped. And it's it's kind of really glad to be able to come and be with them at this time for a little while. And so I'm right now in the home of my sister and her family, and she has 4 children. They're all school age, ages from 7 to 18. And then my mother, who later joined them, who is, that's my immediate family, who all from Kiev, and she's a retired engineer who all of them lived in Kiev. And during as the I was thinking, and yourself, maybe not in the city where there, as bombs are starting to fall and the bomb shelters, large apartment there, really sound or to a summer home, which wasn't heated in February, but they decided it would be safer to stay there and had a separate basement, and they could have a heating and water sources. But what they ended up was on the edge of where the military was attacking from Belarus area. And so my sister and her family, within first few days of that week, decided that it wasn't safe. And it was really terrifying to stay, because the Russian military bombed indiscriminately and shelled and any time of day. And it just was a really scary experience, especially to be with kids. So they decided was 6 of them. They piled into a very tiny car and they drove for days and days. It took them many, many hours going back routes with Ukraine. Also, by then turned all the lights off. That we were just talking today about how, in one way, they could see the stars for, in these around the cities, but at night they had to move through nighttime and to the borders, and then they crossed the border into Hungary, and that's striking. So, and then they kept driving because they had an invitation from a very old family friend and colleague in Lisbon who said, please come here, we'll have resources. So they kept driving and driving and driving through much of Europe until they landed here in Lisbon. And they are both grateful, as those of you who imagine. They also feel very in different ways guilty, as all of us, because of everybody left behind. They certainly left with very, very little. They do not speak Portuguese. There's some shared English, but it is really, to think of people adapting to just leaving everything, jobs, lives, homes, being in a new place and surviving there and establishing is something they're doing. They're also continually watching news. They, all those places, Bucha, Irpin, Makarovka, all of those places, they're right in their town surrounding where they were. So they're places where there were elementary schools, their hospitals, their friends lived. And so it's very, very scary and uncertain time. And again, like what we're hearing, people, they don't know who. Still, it's tough to be in touch with some people, although we have these incredible internets and so forth and chats. My mother decided to stay. I think nobody probably, when war begins, right, knows how terrifying and how scary it would be. There would be that inhumane, or and she thought that she's fiercely Ukrainian, and no place in the car, and she thought, she'll stay in the basement, she will protect the home, and she will kind of write it out and be clever about it. But she ended up being surrounded by a very active war zone with actual gunfighting, and on her streets around her, she often was without water and electricity, and then it would turn on. So she was right on the edge where the war zone would move in and out. And for days, because my sister was moving through with very little internet connection, a phone, I just kept vigil with my mother from United States because she was alone in the basement. Sometimes there was no reception, other times it would be weak, but we could just connect. And other times we would just, when a break in fighting, we would talk about dreaming about future or so forth. So because it became really terrifying, and I could hear explosions and planes and sometimes gunfighting, and it was just we kept saying goodbye, thinking maybe that would be the last time we speak. And so again, for days, we did not know how to get her out of a home on her own. And we, my sister, I, friends, we asked everybody to call anybody. We used all the chats and that's now online things. And then someone, we don't really know who, called her one early morning about 6 a.m. and said, you have 30 minutes, it's break, in fighting, we will get you to a train station. She just grabbed her purse. She hoped that she might stop by her apartment, and there are mementos of my father who died a long while ago, of us, money, possessions. And the person said, you can't go to that area. It's been under active attack. So they dropped her at the train station in Kiev. She got on a commuter train into entryway. It was, she said, very, very cold, incredibly crowded. They stood like sardines like this. And she stood up for 12 hours in the train, surrounded by kiddos that were crying and people who were quite terrified, and going to Lviv in the Western Ukraine. And from Lviv, with friends of friends of friends, she went to, again, border to Hungary. And then from there on, I could help fly her to my sister. So I think my family in different ways is lucky, we would say, right to be alive and to survive. But I also, have, I've gone to Mariupol, to summer camps. I have dear friends who are from the city and from Kharkiv and other areas. And of course, I have cousins and cousins, large families, right? Families and my friends. And, this continued war and fighting and this kind of very inhumane attack on a nation, and the use of the language, as you probably hear, of denazifying and de-Ukrainianizing Ukraine is very, very painful to us. So I think I'll stop there. I just, again, want to give, I know through your congregation, through Marcia and others, just my deepest gratitude for all you've done personally in your hearts and with your financial support and everything else you've done to support Ukrainians in this time. So thank you.
Thank you, Oksana. Thank you very much. There's so many striking things, among them that it was someone you don't even know who contacted your mother to get on the train, let's go. The Shoah as well. There were just so many people who were strangers, who hid Jews in barns or in basements or in attics, strangers who understood that this was a moment that history was calling them and God was calling them. And of course, the other striking thing is the way in which Ukrainians are being portrayed as Nazis, and that serves as the justification for brutalizing and dehumanizing. And Jews were regarded as all kinds of things, parasites and rodents, and the name calling is the prerequisite for dehumanizing and brutalizing. And the continuum between these two stories is striking and in many ways frightening. So thank you very, very much. Thank you again for joining us at this hour. And God bless your sister, your family, and your mother, and the people of Ukraine. Thank you. And I hope we will meet in person at some point as well. Thank you. Let's resume on the next page. As we think about spiritually resisting, physically resisting this kind of brutality and evil together. Vanitzak, and we cried out. There were many who resisted the Nazi oppression, Jews and non-Jews. Resistance took many forms, both spiritual and physical. And we can move down the table. Ellen? Let's join together. Anima amin, anima amin, anima amin, behemuna shilema, biviat hamashiach, biviat hamashiach ani ma'amin, v'af al pi she'itmamea, im kol ze ani ma'amin. I can think of no better way to introduce our fourth story tonight of a man who is a very beloved man in our community, Rabbi Charles Krauss, the father of Audrey Krauss, of course, visited here many, many times when David and Audrey lived here for so many years with their family. And he is a remarkable figure of resistance, even in the most horrible of circumstances. So thank you, Shira and Keshet.
Rabbi Charles Krauss was born in Hungary in the 1930s. During his teenage years, World War II broke out, started, and in 1944, he, his parents, and his younger brother Nathan were deported to Alach concentration camp near Dachau. Charles and his father were placed in separate parts of the camp from his mother and brother. The prisoners in the Alach camp were subject to slave labor conditions. Death in the camp was common as a result of the cruelty of the SS, malnutrition, and inadequate sanitation.
In a letter he wrote to his grandson, Harry Diamond, Rabbi Krauss, in rather an understatement, described the camp as a not very pleasant place. But he added that being able to be a bunkmate of his father's made the situation a little bit more bearable. In addition, several of his hometown acquaintances, including the son of their revered rabbi, were also among their campmates. This allowed them to reminisce about the good old days, especially about all the delicious food they used to enjoy.
The rations that the Nazis gave them were horrible, yet the conversations were not limited to that topic of food alone. They frequently talked to each other about the loved ones who were separated from them, expressing the hope that their loved ones were having an easier time of things than they were. Sadly, this was not the case for Rabbi Krauss. Both his mother and brother were killed.
Thanks to his father's scholarship and his wonderful memory, Rabbi Krauss and the others were able to discuss various topics of Jewish tradition, even without the benefit of having any Sfarim available. They comforted each other with some of the encouraging sections of the Haggadah. Not just once have they risen up against us. In fact, every generation they rise up and seek our destruction, and the Holy One, blessed is He, saves us from their hands.
Although they did not have a siddur or machzor available, they were able to do some davening from time to time, relying mainly on memory. Once on Sukkot, his father suggested that he lead Hallel for everyone, and so he did. With tears in their eyes, they sang Hodel Hashem Ki Tov and Min HaMetzir. In my distress, I cried to the Lord. Feelings of loss and feelings of despair, but somehow, somewhere, you find thoughts of happiness deep down inside. By singing the prayers for Sukkot you tried to hide. With everything despicable that was going on at the time, you dream about food and loved ones and express hatred of the Nazi crime. You say that being with your father and fellow Jews as bunkmates helped a lot. As you sang Hallel, everyone feared not. As they sang and prayed, a little feeling of relief from always feeling afraid. Someone had to lead the Hallel to help them get through. That someone was important. That someone was you.
Thank you, Shira, for writing that poem and Keshe for reciting it. And Hal, if I can ask you to carry us forward into one of the names most associated with resistance. And of course, that poem is famously put to music. Eli, Eli, Shelo Yigamer Leolam, Acho Behayam, Rishu Shel Hamayim, Birak HaShamayim, Tfilat Adam, Hacho Behayam, Rishu Shel Hamayim, Birak HaShamayim, Tfilat And there were Jews as part of the military resistance too. Those who could escape, including, as we'll learn in a minute, Abraham Sutzkever, joined together with non-Jewish resistance groups, partisan groups fighting the Nazis. Resistance was spiritual, resistance was physical, resistance is at the root of the human spirit. And so if I can ask, I don't know your name. Yeah. Oh, Hannah, if you can please read the next part. Together. Never say this is the final road for you, though leaden skies may cover over days of blue, as the hour that we long for is so near. Our step beats out the message, we are here, as the hour that we long for is so near. Our step beats out the message, we are here. From lands so green with palms to lands all white with snow, we shall be coming with our anguish and our woe. And where a spurt of our blood fell on the earth, there our courage and our spirit have rebirth. And where a spurt of our blood fell on the earth, there our courage and our spirit have rebirth. The early morning sun will brighten our day, and yesterday with our foe will fade away. But if the sun delays and in the east remains, this song is past where generations must maintain. But if the sun delays and in the east remains, this song is past where generations must maintain. Therefore never say the road now ends for you, though leaden skies may cover over days of blue, as the hour that we long for is so near. Our step beats out the message, we are here, as the hour that we long for is so near. Our step beats out the message, we are here. And Mindy, if you can, the top of the next page as we move to the very end. And what happened to Miriam Sarachek and to Hanka Ablin and to Abraham Sutzkever and to Rabbi Charles Krauss? Mindy? Everyone could please be seated. That'd be great. Thank you.
Miriam's family escaped the prison camp in German-occupied France to Vichy, France, and using false papers fled there to Spain, and then to Cuba. Miriam spent the next 5.5 years in Cuba as a refugee, where she attended school and learned Spanish and English. In 1947, Miriam and her family were granted visas to enter the United States, and they moved to New York. She graduated from the Bronx High School of Science in 1950 and began studying at Barnard College the same year. She received her PhD at Columbia University in 1960.
Despite advice from mentors that becoming a housewife or part-time teacher might suit her better, Dr. Sarachek joined the physics department of the City College of New York, and in 1996, City College honored her by naming her as a distinguished professor of physics for the groundbreaking physics research she had done throughout her career.
Dr. Sarachek died on October 7, 2021, in Manhattan at the age of 88. We are honored to have Karen Sarachek, Dr. Sarachek's daughter, with us here today.
And thank you, Karen, so much for joining us. We are honored by your presence.
Sometime in May, the gunshots, the shouted commands, and the SS guards were gone. Russian soldiers liberated camp. Honka's parents placed her, along with two of her siblings, on an American military truck, headed for a children's camp created by a Jewish aid group. As the truck began to move, Honka's red hat flew off her head and fell onto the ground. The war was over, and hope for a new and better life was born.
And Honka went on, of course, to raise the family, including our friend Jason Ablin, a family deeply committed to humanity, deeply committed to education, and deeply committed to hope in the future.
Avram Slutzgiver escaped from the ghetto together with his wife, and they joined the partisans who were battling the Nazis in 1946. He was called as a witness during the Nuremberg trials and testified against Franz Müller, the murder of his mother and son.
After that, he moved to Tel Aviv, eventually winning the Israel Prize for his Yiddish poetry. He lived in Israel with his family until he died in January 2010.
Rabbi Krauss and his father survived the war and ultimately resettled in New York. He attended NYU and then, when that became too expensive, City College. He entered rabbinical school and then became a rabbi of a shul in a small city just outside of Philadelphia, where he served for decades.
Rabbi Krauss retired years ago, but continues to still work as a Seder Yidden and to serve his colleagues as a go-to source on the rabbinical assembly Litzer for the answers to the questions relating to halakha, minhag, and the sources of all forms of Jewish and shul practice.
And just to think about the way in which a person can see what he saw, endure what he endured, and to raise a family with hope and with optimism and with a sense of service to the Jewish people is remarkable and very much part of the teaching of the whole story that we commemorate on Yom HaShoah. Let's all rise as we conclude with Hatikvah, which before there was a state of Israel, and obviously all the more so when there is a state of Israel, is our anthem of hope. for making all of the complicated tech work tonight so that people both in the room and very far away from the room could be part of the Seder. I want to thank Adina for making so much happen, and Jose for setting everything up for us. And thank you all for coming and participating. Thank you to the Gesher students. And everyone who'd like to join us for Mariv will go directly upstairs and daven Mariv. And much to think about and reflect upon. Thank you, Oksana, as well, of course. And may we know peace soon in our world. And don't forget your stuff.